I'd like to welcome you all to this particular session. Without further ado, I'm just going to turn off my camera and then we'll start what we have planned for the evening. Now, I'm anticipating that this session is going to take approximately 1 hour. We may be slightly over that time, but I will do the best that I can to stick within the anticipated time frame. Tonight's lecture is going to be anchored around business analysis in practice. So you'll probably be wondering whether this is going to be beneficial to you. So if you're entirely new to business analysis, this is going to be an opportunity for you to assess whether the activities involved in business analysis is something that you would want to venture into. If you have already undergone a business analysis training before now, well, this would be an opportunity for you to weigh the level of knowledge that you currently have at the moment, as well as see whether there are gaps in certain other areas that you would need to fill out. If you are perhaps someone who's maybe done 1 to 2 years worth of experience, got 1 to 2 years worth of experience as a business analyst, and perhaps you were looking to maybe get into the contract market or perhaps change the domain where you're currently working, this training will equally be suitable to help you define the sort of things that you could find in that regard. And so moving forward, the case study that we're going to be looking at today will be business analysis, and we're going to be using an NHS EPR case study. Now, very shortly, we're going to define who a business analyst is, and we'll essentially give a bit of a context. So I'm hoping that most of the people who are within this meeting would, of course, already know who a business analyst is or what a business analyst does. However, we are still going to go through that definition just so that we put a proper context to the several things that we're going to be learning this evening. Okay, so I would ask that you please mute yourself. Let me just check to make sure that we are all admitted. Okay, awesome. So there is a very key, very little, definition about what business analysis is all about. And I've put here that business analysis is the art of enabling change within an organization. Now, that's not really what I'm hoping to teach today. Like I said earlier, I know that most people here would know or have a very good idea of what a business analyst or who a business analyst is or what business analysis is all about. Rather, what I would like to draw your attention to will be within the context of business analysis, your ability to focus key or perhaps to focus quite rapidly around people, systems, and processes. In a minute, we're going to be talking about several types of analysis. We're going to be discussing, excuse me, bear with me 1 second. Sorry about that. I had banging somewhere. So in the next few minutes, we're going to be talking a lot about analysis. And as a business analyst, you'll be, you'll have this on your shoulder, which has to do with different types of analysis, whether you're trying to find out the current events or the current business processes within a particular place of work, or perhaps you've just been asked to go carry out some level of analysis. I think it's one of those gray areas that every normal human being would actually think that, yes, I do know what it means to conduct an analysis, but then in real practice, we then begin to struggle as to how do we scope it, or what exactly is it that we start looking into? What is the start of this analysis and what is going to be the end of this analysis? And this essentially is where people, systems, and processes come in play. So throughout the duration of what we have planned out for today, I'm going to be discussing this quite intently, if that makes sense. So if I proceed once again, that the issues, excuse me, please, there's someone at the door. I'll literally be 2 seconds. I'm so sorry about that. Just 2 seconds. I'm really, really so sorry about that. I thought there was someone to attend to someone that was a very serious bang, and I do apologize. So essentially looking into the case study for the EPR Business Change Program, I'm going to give you a bit of a context as to what we are hoping to do. Now you have to think about, I'm so really sorry I've rushed up the staircase, so I'm breathing very hard. I might take a second just to chill out a bit. So in the current state, we're essentially looking to understand what the current system does for that organization. We're talking about the EPR. Now, the EPR stands for Electronic Patient Records, and it's a host of several systems. Excuse me, please. I will just take 30 seconds to catch my breath. So sorry. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Please, I'm hoping that I would have caught my breath a little bit. So I'll talk slowly and till I fully regain that back. So essentially the case study that we're going to be looking at today is around business analysis activities, which is applied to the NHS. And the context of it will be around migrating from a current patient administration system to a future state patient administration system. The patient administration system essentially is the system that is used to admit a patient, that's used to register a patient in the first place, used to transfer a patient, used to discharge a patient, wherein some of the medications and other discharge activities pertaining to a patient is electronically performed. Now, what could trigger the reason why an organization would want to retire a current patient administration system to move on to a future one? Now, let us consider the fact that some of these systems in the first place are really very, very old. So they may have procured a past system 20 years ago or 21 years ago. Unfortunately, the company that sold that system to them is now about leaving the market. And because they're about leaving the market, the implication of that to the trust will be that they will no longer have any IT support. Now, if they're not having any IT support, it simply means that we can no longer rely on that system to continue to display or perhaps to use in taking care of our patients or taking care of patient safety. As a result of that, a project will be triggered. The essence of that project is that we want to retire that electronic patient set of electronic patient records or that patient administration system and move on to a more recent system that can provide all the existing functionalities which this patient administration system does for us at the moment, as well as provide all other benefits that we can get from a much more recent technology. So this is the context of this particular project. Okay, and throughout the duration of the time that we're going to have today, we're going to be looking at the various aspects of activities in a sequential format that will lead from the start to the end of this particular project. Now, by way of very simple definition, I've put here that for your own perspective as a business analyst, you must understand the functions, the integrations, and the reports provided by the current system and components. You must also understand which services are supported by which components. Now, let us go back to the previous page where I mentioned about people, processes, and technology. In a minute, when we start talking about how you will carry out your initial analysis, we'll then begin to see how all of those come into play. However, by virtue of this conversation, or perhaps by virtue of what I've written in the first paragraph, you can almost immediately begin to see that you begin to understand, or that it's expected of you to investigate what functions. So by what functions, I'm talking about function of admitting a patient, the function of discharging a patient, the function of maybe prescribing medication if it's equipped with EPMA, the function of referring a patient from one consult, and so on and so forth. So it's your responsibility as the business analyst to understand each of those functions, but you also need to understand that each of those functions are used within different business processes. There are business processes associated to each of those functions, and you must also know those business processes. And very importantly, would then be in a setting like the hospital where you will have more than one system. At each stage of that process, is there a different system that comes in to do a particular kind of work? If you scope your analysis perspective based on these three, you will not go wrong. So let us continue. And then in the future state, it equally becomes your responsibility as the business analyst to consider whether the system that we are trying to implement. So remember, the overall idea is to remove the current system and go live or perhaps implement a future state system. So now you're asking yourself, will this future state system be sufficient enough to power or perhaps to take care or provide all sorts of dependencies, if that makes sense? So everything that the current state system does for us, will this future state system be capable of providing a replacement functionality for all of them? This is what you're going to do from start to finish, and I'm going to be shedding more light now as to how you're going to do those, from time to time. So before I do that, I just wanted to give a bit of a background. This helps you in terms of context. Remember, we're talking about the patient administration system, right? And within this patient administration system, there are equally associated processes. So we know that the patient administration system is a software, and you're now getting an idea that this software helps to run the hospital in terms of admission, discharge, and transfers, and other activities. Some of those other activities we're now going to mention, just so that you get a bit more of an idea of what that system itself does. Okay, and we'll also listen to some terms or understand some terms, just so that we will have a safe ride as we move along today. So if you were to land a role tomorrow within the NHS, chances are that you might be asked to do, to do a process mapping or to map out the processes for the ADT. Sorry, I'm just checking. I think there was a message which came in. Okay, that's fine. You might be asked to do the ADT process mapping. And what that simply means is admit, discharge, and transfer. So when it comes to admission, it sounds very easy because you can always ask that question that says, what is the process for admitting a patient? But then when you dig deeper, you find out that there are several, processes. So you could have elective admissions, could have non-elective admissions, and we could even have DTAs, which come from the ED, just accident and emergency. Now, there are equally referrals, inpatient referrals, which could be referrals from, a nurse practice, from a nurse to a specialist nurse. So specialist nurses are people, specialist nurses who specialize in one area of medicine. So it could be diabetes specialist medicine, it could be cardiology specialist medicine, and they all work within maybe a cardiology ward or, wards that where diabetic patients are treated. So when you need to make a transfer to these people, there are business processes associated to it, but within this patient administration system, you will have to also electronically refer that patient, because we need to keep electronic records of everything that is happening. Now, we equally have something known as RTT, which is referral to treatment. And the referral to treatment essentially, consider it that someone goes to go and see the GP. But then the GP feels that maybe there's something a little bit wrong, or maybe there's something that requires more investigation that the GP cannot handle. And for such reason, the GP then, decides to refer that patient to a specialist. Or maybe the GP suspects cancer, and then they need to make a referral. So essentially, they also do that within the system. It's a business process, a clinical process, but it's also one which is aided by the system. So there will be an electronic referral The person will be within the waiting list, and so on and so forth. So it's got its own entire process to it. Then we're looking at something called clinical notes. If you ever worked within the hospitals, you probably know that, sometimes you see nurses saying, well, I need to do my notes. Some of those things will equally be the handover notes. So there will always be need for clinicians to sort of, create some kind of clinical notes. So doctors, as a matter of fact, could actually come in and, sort of, impute details into chief complaints or other fields within that organization. Nurses could actually provide handover notes, which are documented into the records of that patient. So all of these things are equally aided by the patient administration system. And the clinical coding essentially refers to the fact that, even though we know that healthcare is free, essentially somehow the hospitals will have to claim that money back from, will have to claim it back from central government. And clinical coding essentially happens when a patient has left the hospital and there's a specific code for each item. So, for example, for a particular medication, will have its own code. One day in hospital will have its own code. And, of course, there's a price tag associated to each of those codes. And at the end of the day, the system will calculate it, and then they'll be able to claim that money back. Now, reporting is a very big aspect of business analysis. And it's essentially the idea that there are software systems or capabilities of a system that allows different people, authorized people within the organization, to query that system. So, for example, you can say to the patient administration system, I want to see the number of people who were admitted between 8 p.m. last night and 9 a.m. this morning. And then the system would essentially, generate that kind of report and then provide it to you. And then we also have order comes, which deals with, radiology and pathology, wherein nurses would want to book for, tests, and they can also do that electronically. Now, other than that, in looking at the right-hand side, you have, something known as capacity management. All right, essentially, capacity management is managed or handled by people that you refer to as capacity managers. Now, essentially, what these people do, or their responsibility, is to ensure or perhaps manage the number of inflow that is coming into the hospital. So let's say, for example, that hospital is got like 1,000 bedded capacity. They don't want a situation wherein the number of people who are coming into hospital would exceed the number of beds that they have. And there are several other things that come into play as to how to manage that, but we don't have the time to sort of delve further into those. And we also have discharge management, and under those would equally come, complex discharges, what's it called again? Reason for delay or discharge tasks, transfer of care, and so on and so forth. We equally have vitals management, which essentially can be an integrated service wherein healthcare assistants and nurses are imputing blood pressure, pulse and oxygen saturation, and so on and so forth. They're imputing that data into the iPad, but then that iPad is integrated with the patient administration system. And for that reason, information is being continuously assimilated between the two systems. Then we equally have, community management. Those are patients who are, discharged to the community, as well as, the GPs, whom you obviously would have visited at some point. They're able to get your details on that system. So I'm hoping that by now you would at least have, gotten a bit of an idea of what this system is, and obviously merging it with what the overall intent of the project is. You probably have a bit of mental picture of what we are trying to do. We are not trying, as a matter of this project, to reinvent the wheel. What we're actually trying to do is to remove one of those things which I mentioned. So I mentioned people, processes, and technology. We want to remove the technology and replace it with another technology of similar functionality. So we are looking for a like for like. We want to make sure that the system that we're bringing in is fully capable of doing everything that the current state system is doing. Now, your first piece of work as a BA would most likely be around initial analysis. And that's what I mentioned to you towards towards the beginning, because if you were to get into that position, possibly what you'll be asked to do would be to carry out some level of analysis. And I have personally seen, people struggle a little bit because not really knowing where to start, or perhaps not even having a pure direction for the analysis or the pieces of analysis that they have to go on about. In this case, we want to understand the processes, the business processes that are associated with this current state system. That is the system we want to remove. And the reason why we need to know about all these processes is so that we can actually check with the incoming system that the incoming system is sufficient or capable of providing a replacement functionality for each of those functionalities that the current state system is currently supporting, or each of the processes that the current state system is still supporting. So the outcome of your as is analysis will be a level of documented process maps. And when you look at the process map that I have in front of me, you can actually see that I've used a technique whereby I mapped out the processes within one swim lane. I sort of, mentioned the systems involved within the second swim lane and then the people. So this gives you a very fantastic view. For example, this is a discharge process, and it gives you a very fantastic view of what the overall discharge process currently is like. But not only that, it tells you where this current system plays a role within that discharge process. Because in completing that discharge process, you're going to have a combination of more than one system, maybe like 2 to 3 different systems plus paperwork. So it doesn't mean that this system does everything, but you need to understand what the current system actually does. So the outcome of this piece of analysis would be, number one, understanding within your own mind, but two, there needs to be a documented evidence of this understanding, which would be by virtue of your as is document, something of this nature. Now, following on from there, it then becomes important that you start studying what the future state system would look like. Remember what I mentioned. It's not just, studying how the future state system, but it's studying how the future state system works in conjunction or perhaps as a result, or perhaps looking at trying to identify how it works in consideration that this would need to replace what the current state functionality is already doing, or what the current state system is already doing. Right? So as a bare minimum, we don't want to lose any of the very wonderful things that the current state system is doing. Rather, we would improve. So improving means that we have to get, number one, everything that it currently does, and then we can start considering what else or other improvements that we would need to make. And how you would essentially get this kind of knowledge would be to watch the training video. So this is what plays out. These systems, I must also mention that these systems are what we call commercial off-the-shelf solution. What that simply means is that the system, the patient administration system, which you are purchasing to replace that old one, is an already made system. So, the same way you just go and, you buy maybe an already made cloth. In this case, this is an already made system. So because you're buying an already made system, someone made that system. There's a company that made that system that sells the license to that trust, right? So that company would already have a training video. 9 out of 10 times there will be a training video about how the different aspects of that system works. You might also want to ask them to give you a SAMPIT access or a demo access. So a demo access or SAMPIT access is like giving you login credentials to that system, wherein you know that the data that you have within that system is not live data. So you can afford to make mistakes, delete stuff, upload stuff, and all of that, and they still wouldn't mean a thing. And then very importantly, you will need to sustain consistent collaboration with the vendor subject matter expert, because when the vendors supply that system to the hospital, to that company, they don't just supply it and leave. So it might probably take 6 months, 9 months, 1 year, 1.5 years to fully implement that system within that organization. And for the duration of that time, you're going to have people from that vendor. You're going to have some SMEs from that vendor supporting that organization until they go live. So, just a little bit of a rollback. You've come into the organization, you've started the as is processes, the systems that play within each steps of the processes, and the people who actually conduct those actions or perhaps who are involved within the processes. You have now started looking at the future state system, and at the back of your mind, you are looking to identify or ensure that the future state system essentially is able to is capable of being a perfect replacement for the current state system. Now, following that, we'll then start looking at gap analysis. So even though this is a high level training, I've just put a very small screenshot here that sort of helps us to, get a bit more understanding as to what we mean. But I want to draw your mind possibly away from where it could have been. What do we mean by gap analysis? It's uh, there's a very popular mindset of gap analysis being the difference between the current state and the future state, and that's correct. But in a case like this, or perhaps how do we build a mental picture, or how do we draw that gap analysis into something that is just as plain as possible, wherein we can, relate with it in very, very plain terms? So we're no longer looking at, well, the difference between the as is and the to be being something that we cannot fathom. In essence, we are actually picking out component by component, and we are carrying out gap analysis on each and every different component. So for example, we can pick out the component within the current state of admitting a patient, right? And we fully explore how that functionality works within the current state system. At this point now, focus is only on the functionality. So we then go ahead to do an analysis on that functionality. And then the essence of that analysis for us to be able to compare it with the replacement functionality or with the replacement component of the future state. So in the case where we have like referrals, for example, in the current state, and then we check how it works, and we go to the future state and we check how it works, and everything checks out, then there is no gap. If, however, we check the referrals within the current state system, and then we go to the future state system and we find out that it's missing a capability, for example, we cannot report it or we cannot pull reports from referrals, then that becomes a problem. Or maybe we begin to see that there are several data fields that are missing within the future state, referral UI, then that becomes a gap. So the key thing here being that we now need to pick out each of the relevant components of that system from start to finish, and we are going to have to do a gap analysis on each of them. So can you now see the importance of the as-is analysis which you did, wherein your mind was focused on the people, the process, and the technology? So you know the process now, and you know where this technology comes in. So you know you have all the facts, you have all the areas, you have all the components which you are now needed or required to do your gap analysis upon. Now, the result of your gap analysis would either be that there is no gap or that you have identified a gap. Well, if you've identified a gap, then kudos, right? But you have to understand that the overall, what's required of you isn't simply to identify a gap. You also need to find the solution to that gap. But before you go on ahead to find a solution, we need to properly assess the implication of the gap which you have identified. Meaning that, let's say in the current system, we have a functionality for doctor handover, and you go to the future state system, and the future state system does not have a functionality for doctor handover. When you've engaged with the key stakeholders, they've identified to you that, look, this is a disaster. It's a must-have for us. We really, really need that information. If we don't have it, it's going to lead to negligence. We could even face lawsuits and all of that. So they give you the impact. So what follows after you've essentially identified each of those gaps will be to carry out an operational impact assessment. And the operational impact assessment, or perhaps just impact assessment, will tell you the level, how serious is this? If we don't find a solution to this gap, how will this impact us as an organization? And your organization would normally have a template that will help you to do that impact assessment. So I've put a few lines here that says that you have to identify the impact, and you also have to identify the impacted areas or the processes or the services which are impacted. And then you have to estimate the possibility of occurrence. And obviously that has to be in low, medium, or high. And then you have to estimate the seriousness of the impact. So should this impact happen, what will be the level of seriousness? Or should it be in such a way that we don't find any replacement functionality or anything to plug that gap? And then we move on to the future state and we go live with that future state. How serious will this be to us? So the long and short of this impact assessment will be that we want to know how the gap which we identified will impact us as an organization. And then once we've been able to establish that, the key thing that then comes up will be for you as the business analyst to start looking for a solution for that problem, or rather for that gap. And how do we find the solutions, for a gap? Essentially, it is through options appraisal, otherwise also known as options evaluation. Now, obviously, this is a high-level course, but I'll give you a tip of the iceberg once again around this, in the sense that most times you'd actually have a bit of time with your, with the affected stakeholders. You cannot underestimate their level of experience within that place of work. Some of them have 20 years, some of them 10, some of them 15. So somehow they're in a position to actually reason with you and be able to come up with a few options. Most of the times, one of the places, in fact, the most convenient place that we start looking at as business analysts under situations like this will be around configuration. Now, the essence of that is that the commercial off-the-shelf solution, which is sold to us, excuse me, will have a very, very, very strong, or perhaps, a very flexible way in terms of configuration, meaning that we can do almost everything. Some of the systems that I've seen very recently, they come with something known as custom fields, which means that, it's almost possible to configure anything that you want within that system. But unfortunately, there are things that you cannot fully customize. Okay. So in that case, we start looking at, other options. Are we going to go paper-wise? Are we going to develop the, new option from scratch, and so on and so forth? In any case, working with your stakeholders, working with your SMEs, working with people who are involved within that, chain of decision and who have the knowledge that you require can help you to identify viable options. You will then have to analyze each of those viable options. You'll have to document your evaluation within an options evaluation document. And then comes the approval process, wherein you have to present to a team of stakeholders. Now, this team of stakeholders will probably be made up of, heads of various departments within that place of work or within that organization, right? And they're, because they head several departments, and there's something you need to bear in mind. One change may affect multiple departments. Okay, so if this has to do with doctors, handover notes, maybe ED, which is another department on its own, will be using it. AMU, AMA, maybe it affects them as well. Frailty, maybe it affects them. On-call doctor. So you can see that it cuts across several departments. You probably have people from those departments, maybe ward managers from each of those departments, and they make up the design team. And that design team essentially will be the people who would approve or decline the proposition that you're making. Because the essence of the options appraisal is for you to evaluate all of different options that can solve that problem, and you will be recommending only one out of those options. And that one that you're recommending, you will have to make a case in support of it. Now, after you've essentially gone through for that, made your presentation and, hopefully gotten approval for it, I need to mention as well that, a project of this capacity, you probably have several, gaps. Some of the things that I've seen probably run into maybe like 60 or 70, or maybe not only gaps, but then also some other areas where other operational impacts were identified. So it's usually very, very big. Okay. In any case, your your set of activities as a BA to develop options appraisal, submit the options appraisal for approval, present the options approval, and hopefully elicit a feedback of approval, will be done across several components, several gaps. So you can probably be doing maybe like 10, 11, 12. The other BAs within your team will probably be doing maybe like around the same figure. So everyone sort of, manages their pieces of work and gets approval. Once it's been approved by that team, it becomes law, right? It becomes law in the sense that it forms a core aspect of that. It can no longer be changed. This is now a high level approval. It's been approved at the highest level. That is the way the future state is now going to be. So we'll continue doing this for several months, maybe 2 to 3 months, and so on and so forth. And the time will come when we've, sort of closed down most, if not all, of those gaps or operational impacts that we've had. We've resolved them. We've gotten approvals for how they're going to be in the future state. And we are now trying to start, gradually moving away from this kind of activity, from the design activity, and then we're now, gradually trying to move closer to implementation. So at this stage, we now want to, review the OIA. Now, OIA stands for Operational Impact Assessment Log, or rather the Operational Impact Assessment, but there's a log. The Excel template, which I mentioned to you, which will help you to do your operational impact assessment. You will contribute to it, other BAs will contribute to it, other members of the team will equally contribute to it. And it is now this log that has 60, 70, 80, 100 entries that we are now looking to close down. And close down doesn't mean that we just delete it. Close down means that we go through each line to ensure that we have now found a solution for each of the impacts that were assessed, right? So at this point, we just want to go through it and make sure that everything has been resolved, that we don't have any open unresolved cases. There are some resolutions that will not be perfect, and that's normal with every project. We cannot, in all fairness, find a 100% solution to every problem. There are problems or gaps that will find some level of solution which is better than nothing, but which is not perfect, or which is not even as good as it was at the moment. There are equally cases or situations where the options that we have at hand will pose a very huge risk to the project. So, for example, would be where we cannot do a configuration to get a particular functionality. We speak to the vendors, and then the vendors say, yes, we can do it for you, but then it will take 3 months. Well, the project is estimating that in 3 months we should be going live with this project. And then these guys are telling us that it's going to take 3 months to build this. So immediately that causes a problem. It raises a risk with the project. So you have to discuss that or raise that to the project manager and ensure that that is, captured within the RAID log and managed as time goes on. So again, mentioning that this is a high-level webinar. Hopefully in a much more detailed context, I'll be more than happy to delve more into each of these topics because they're quite very broad in nature, but this will give you a very clear concept as to how things are done sequentially in a real life situation. Now, at this point that we've sort of, worked our way through closing down most of the items within the OIA, it is now time for us to get the overall sign off. So let me try to make this make sense, right? So you bought this system, which is an already made system. You did your gap analysis, and then you found out that 23 things, they have 23 gaps. 23 gaps meaning that this new system cannot do 23 things that the current system is doing. And for these 23 things, we now said, okay, out of the 23 of them, we are going to configure the system to start doing 21 out of 23 of them. You did your options appraisal, and then you recommended and told the team that, look, we can do a configuration and we can build this system to behave in a certain way. Unfortunately, it is not going to be 100% like the current state system was, but we can actually just make it to be good enough in such a way that it can serve us. So you've done all of those and they have approved all 23 of them. Now, after they've approved all 23 of them, your system administrators would then begin to do those configurations, right? So they will configure all those recommendations that you made. They will configure the system to behave in alliance with those recommendations that you made. So after they've finished doing the configuration, it is now time for us to take the whole system and present it to the same design authority, that approved all those individual options which you recommended. And at the point where they approve it, it becomes law. We can no longer change anything without going through a formal change request process. And once this is equally, towards this time as well, the business analyst may be tasked with developing a functional design specification, which in essence is a document that actually holds each of the component functions, how it will behave, where it pulls the data from, and if relevant, which icons will be, what icon would we identify this with, and so on and so forth. So the functional design specification is more like, slightly like a functional requirement document, but essentially it's not really talking, it goes deep into the design components of that particular system, right? It's talking about the configuration elements, talking about the actual function in itself, talking about maybe even a screenshot of the UI, capturing the fact that when this happens, the light turns to blue, and when that one happens, the icon turns to amber, and so on and so forth. I'll be more than happy over time to show you a sample of this, and if we'll continue to work in the future state, I'm more than happy to talk you through how these are created. But in any case, we are now planning to get a baseline. We're trying to baseline the design, wherein once we get a sign off, we know that we're in business. And once that sign off has been made, then, like I mentioned earlier, if a stakeholder comes up with any further requirement, it then has to go through a change request process. So, very briefly, a change request process simply means that it's no longer automatic change. So when a stakeholder comes up with a change request or comes up with a request to add or remove something within the system, now it has to go through the hospital or the trust's, standard process, which is usually, maybe raising it from the intranet. There's usually a change request form within the intranet, or some organizations that I've worked with will have a system specifically for that, or a system that aids that. So they go there, they raise that request. It's monitored by someone who's called a change assessor person. The person would actually look at it and direct it appropriately. And in that case, they are, directing appropriately will probably find its way to your inbox. And then you'll have to assess what that change request, in other words, what is that stakeholder asking for? Is it within scope? Is this something that can be done? You essentially do an analysis on all of that, and then you make a formal recommendation to, whatever advisory board that you have within that organization. And they will be the ones who have the right or the final say as to whether they're going to approve it or not. Of course, there are also politics that, come in under such circumstances. And if we do have the time, I will weigh in a little bit on that before we leave. So, and now we are delving into the implementation phase, right? And the whole idea of this implementation phase is that all the configurations that we've done, everything we've essentially done, to get that system to where it is, we now want to start working towards a time when we're actually going to go and take away the old system and implement this new system, and then, begin to see how things are playing out. So please bear in mind that up until this point, we've not written a single user story, we've not written a single functional requirement, apart from the functional design specification, which we spoke about earlier. We've not done any form of requirement specification. Okay, now moving forward, it's also important to mention that at this point, when when the design and stuff has been approved, chances will then be that the code will be migrated to a new environment, right? And again, it really depends on how technical you are. So environment are just like migrating the code from one server to another server. So before now, we had like environments where everybody had access. We can play around with the environment. We can set things. We can delete stuff and all of that. But now the vendors are going to take that configuration, the master configuration, which has been approved and signed off, and they will now deploy it in another environment. It's usually maybe a UAT environment. And when you go into this UAT environment, all the noise that you could see in the previous system, you will no longer see it there, because all the things, all the icons, all the fields, all the columns that we are not going to be using in the future state will be removed. And only those ones which have been approved during the your options appraisal will be left. So we now have, a new interface, new system that we're going to carry on, start working with. The change request and management process is established. Everyone knows about it. It's cascaded. You can no longer make any change to the system at this point. If you have any stakeholder asking for any changes, please kindly refer you to Mr. Sochi, or kindly refer you to Mr. whoever or Miss whoever. Right? And then at this point, the training team is activated. I'm going to talk about all of this more in details in the following, slide. And not only will the training team be activated, we then start planning towards our user acceptance testing. As part of this implementation exercise, we start developing standard operating procedure documents. We'll map out the future state processes or future state process maps. We may be in a position where we'll develop QRGs. I'll explain what that means in a minute. We will, be tasked with creating awareness, and I'll explain why that's important. We do our readiness checks, and we do our cutover planning. And in some cases, we might even do a controlled downtime. So if you're entirely new to business analysis, I'll explain what all of these what they mean in a minute. Okay, so starting from UAT, so user acceptance testing. So this is the first opportunity that the organization has. And I'm talking about the workers within that organization. This is the first opportunity they have to interact with that system, to use that system. So for example, the new system would now obviously have the functionality, the ADT functionalities to admit, discharge, and transfer. So you might then write out your test scripts for admission, for discharge, and for transfers, and you hand that test script over to the tester. In this case, the tester will be the doctor or the not just lay person. It doesn't have to be anyone from the IT. The people who would normally use that system in a real life situation. So you hand over the test script to them, you hand over the system to them, and then you step aside and they will do the testing. And where it's a pass, they will indicate it's a pass. And where it's a fail, they will indicate it's a fail, right? So you liaise with the test manager to sort of plan that particular UAT. And then on that day, you'll equally play a very significant role in executing the user acceptance testing. The standard operating procedure essentially is a document that recounts the standard procedure for carrying out any sort of activity. So you might find it to be the case that you are writing the SOP for admission, or admitting through ED, or admitting through non-elective admissions, or TCIs, which is to come in. And you will essentially write the different steps which must be followed in essentially admitting a patient digitally within the hospital. So you can write a summary that says, to admit a patient to DTA patient, XYZ criteria must be met. Once XY criteria has been met, click on DTA function, and you take a screenshot of what that looks like. You append it to it, and then you put like all those red markers to indicate which option to select. So you select the option, and then you say once you have selected this option, then go ahead to select a bed or a ward. You take a screenshot and you show the ward and the bed if you like. And then once a ward has been assigned, then complete it by entering your signature or e-signature or whatever. So you list out the step-by-step guide of how that process is executed. That's what we mean by standard operating procedure document. So it's a very important aspect of business change, and business analysts definitely will play a role in the documentation of SOPs. Now, what we normally do is that we might have situations where we have other members peer review the SOPs with us, right? Which means that I can do a document and hand it over to maybe the business change manager or one of the other BAs. They can go through it and make sure that they are okay with it and then hand it back to me. And then it's equally the time for us to start creating our future state process maps. Okay, and also have them approved. Normally, when we produce these, it goes to the intranet. So there's an archive. There's a place where all these things, all the process maps and SOPs will be deployed, usually within the intranet of the organization, but we'll also have copies within the business change teams folder. Okay, so, and let us move forward. So, and I mentioned earlier that around about this time, that the training team will also be activated. And maybe it's even possible, it's even necessary to, provide a rationale as to why the training team is necessary at this point. Think about it. You identified 23 different gaps. Some other people identified some other gaps. Some other things were identified and we've resolved them. And how did we resolve it? We resolve them by finding the best options, which I already mentioned. Sometimes those options cannot be 100%. So if you take away that old system and you deploy the new system, you're going to be deploying something that nobody can use because they've never used that new system. If you have ever worked, as a care worker, as a nurse, as a healthcare professional, you probably have and you've been in a situation where your organization is, implementing some system. You probably see that at some point you'll be mandated to do a training of how that system works. Or maybe you even get a job newly and they need to train you on how that system works, or your manager just wants to show you how things work. Somehow you will be given that training before you're given access to start using the system. So that's essentially what also happens at this stage. The trainers will develop training slides. They will record training videos which will be deployed to the LMS. And essentially the deployed training videos can then be accessed by the workers across the organization and so on and so forth. Now, as a very articulated business analyst, this is also time for you to start considering whether it will be necessary for you to develop a very brief document that highlights the key changes between the old system and the new system, or some of the perceived frequently most asked questions, if that makes sense. So normally when you develop this, and as we get closer to the implementation or to the go live, we will start spreading or distributing these documents across the different wards or different departments. QRG stands for Quick Reference Guides, and those could be like one pager which you can create. And that, for example, that nurses would, on a daily basis, they do like, let me say admissions, or they do like transfers very rapidly. You can just create a one pager that says to transfer a patient, click on this, click on that. When this happens, click on this, finish. Right? You do that, and to admit a patient, click on this. So you just do a very brief direct, direction on a one pager, and you perhaps laminate it and then distribute it to some of those wards. But a time will come when it becomes most necessary. And the best time to distribute it will be within the cutover weekend or the cutover period. I will explain what we mean by cutover in a minute. So remember that the system which we looked into, I'm really, really sorry, there's 2 more minutes to go, but I'll probably take more than that, maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and I do sincerely apologize. I'll make it worthwhile for you, please. So the awareness essentially is, but actually before I explain that, let me put some context so that makes sense, right? So we are taking away a system that is supporting or that is being used by over 10,000 staff members and used to support millions of patients, right? So, and that is now going to happen, let me say, on the 4th of February. So between the 4th of February until the 4th of March is not going to be like, it's not going to be business as usual. It's going to be very rowdy. Downtime or cutover means that we are going to turn off the current state system. And unfortunately, it's not one of those that you turn off and turn on the future state system immediately. No, we can turn off the current state system, and it takes us 24 to 48 hours or even more to bring the new system back up and running. So what that means is that for maybe 24 hours, maybe 30 hours, maybe more, we're going to leave that hospital without some systems. So the big question would then be, how will the system, how will they continue to work without those systems? So there will be a plan in place, but we need to raise awareness. People need to know what is coming on. For example, they need to know that from the 4th of February, that you will no longer be able to use Hospital Pro patient administration system for the next 1 to 2 days. You will have to revert to business continuity plan. And when the new system comes back up, we need to make sure that you are ready. In other words, have you completed your training? Do you have any challenges or any questions? Do you have any reason why you feel you cannot use the new system? Can we discuss it now? Right? So this is the purpose of, that awareness, and we get involved with the comms and engagement team. So essentially the same way that you have your digital team, you also have your comms and engagement team. So those are, they're the ones that send out all those newsletters, all those emails and stuff. In this case, we'll also have like posters and flyers and, and in many cases as well, we visit the wards. The IT team would visit the wards and, spread that awareness, answer questions. You probably have seen them once in a while, maybe in uniforms in blue or something, and written on it, change is coming, or change is here, or EPR is coming next month, or something within those range. And you can stop them and ask them any question, and they will answer that question. As we're getting closer to that cutover, it then becomes necessary that we carry out a readiness assessment check. And that readiness assessment check essentially is a check to know how ready we are, right, as an organization to undergo this change. But I hope you know that it's possible to start the cutover, and along the way we foresee disaster and we just roll it back. So that means we spent like 1 year preparing, but we couldn't go live. God forbid, we had to roll it back again. So as part of that readiness check, we may have to do a go, no-go assessment, which is basically, a consideration of options that are in favor of go, going live. Should we proceed? Which simply means, is everything ready? Are all the work streams all aligned? Have we met up with all the things we were going to meet? We decided we is scheduled to meet up with. Do we have sufficient support in the places where we require support? Do we have the necessary brains and the necessary resources to be able to go live with this? And so on and so forth. Now, there is a strategy which I've been part of a couple of times, which we refer to as a controlled downtime. And what this simply means is that we want to mimic, right? We want to, so let's say we are going live with that system, or the systems go down on the 4th of February. We can decide that on Monday, we'll go to 4 wards, right? And within those 4 wards, we're going to switch off the systems for those 4 wards for 6 hours or for 5 hours. And when we switch off the systems on those wards for for that 4 to 6 hours, we ask them to revert to business continuity plans. Business continuity plan simply means, assuming you lose your systems today, what do you do? Yeah, God forbid, a very big hacking just hits that trust or that company, and or maybe someone walks into that company with an EMP machine or EMP device and roosts all the data centers and all the systems there. Then what? You can't close your business. There's got to be some form of data recovery. There's got to be a way that the company continues to function in the event of losing your system. So that's what we mean by business continuity plans. And the business analyst would equally play a role in reviewing, analyzing, and possibly even documenting, that BCP. So, for example, would be if we lose the systems, we can ask the nurses to start writing their nursing handovers on Microsoft Word, right? And later on, we can do a retrospective data catch-up. So, moving forward again, as part of the readiness assessment, we just want to make sure that all our business continuity plans are all intact, that we have a business continuity plan for every eventuality should we decide to turn off that system. We also look at review the cutover planning, the plans that we have in place for that cutover, review it once more to make sure that we're still on time, or that perhaps that we still things are still the way that we planned it to be. And then the D-Day comes. And the D-Day essentially is the day when we turn off that system. It's known as the downtime. So we turn off the system. The moment we turn off the system, we then revert as a trust, as a company, to business continuity plan. Now, whilst this business continuity plan is ongoing, we will have to continue to review compliance. So you have your business analyst, touching base with each of the different wards. Typical big NHS trusts will have people that we call floor workers. So generally people who just walk around all the wards, making sure everything is okay. Somehow we keep tabs with the various, departments to ensure compliance. And then at some point, what then happens will be data migration. Now, let me just briefly explain the aspect of that data migration. So the system is being used, right? It's being used, let me say, today is Saturday. So the system is being used up until now, and we're switching it off, let me say now. So if we switch the system off now, but there are patients, of course, who are on this ward, number one, who will now be moved to different wards or even discharged before the system comes back up tomorrow. That's one thing apart. We're going to see how we manage that. But the patients who have already been recorded to be on this ward at the time the system was turned off, we now need to migrate the information of those patients to the new system. So which means that by the time that new system comes back up tomorrow or the day after, even if the patient has left this ward, that patient will show on the new system that the patient is still in this ward, in ward 1. Let me say ward 1, for example, right? So the patient was in ward 1 at the time when the system was turned off, right? But in the next 2 days, when the new system is coming back up, the patient is now in ward 7. But because the patient was in ward 1 when the systems were turned off and the data was migrated from the current system to the future state system, then that patient will be in ward 1 when the system comes back up, and we'll have to manually transfer that patient to the appropriate ward or even discharge the patient. Okay, so those are some of the things that happen. But at this point, the downtime begins. The data migration will start, and we start looking at ending the downtime maybe like within the same 24 to 48 hours. So at the point when that downtime ends, it is now time to turn on the new system. And once we turn on that new system, we will start something known as retrospective data catch-up. Let me also explain that to make sense. So remember that I mentioned that at the point when the system goes down, As a business, we'll have to revert to business continuity plan. So part of that business continuity plan can be on paper. So for example, when a patient is admitted, we will now have to admit the patient on paper, fill out, the forms on paper. When we transfer that patient, we'll have to fill the transfer on paper. When we discharge, we have to fill that discharge on paper. When we refer, we have to fill that on paper. When we check the blood pressure of that patient, we have to record it on paper, and so on and so forth. So for the last 1 to 2 days, these things have been done on paper. Now the new system has gone live. We now need to manually start transferring these things that we wrote on paper into the new system, and that is known as retrospective data catch-up. It'll probably take us the whole day, depending on the number of people that we have, to complete that data catch-up. And the next 2 to 3 days will probably be like little, mistakes here and there that needs to be resolved, and all of that. And then the next couple of weeks would then be for us supporting that go live and within that organization for things to settle in as rapidly as possible. Now the few or the final slides essentially points towards the programs that we offer as a company. And all of these programs are essentially led by myself. The first here is a 30 days master program or master's program, which essentially is targeted towards people who would have undergone some level of business analysis training before now. So essentially, maybe someone who's been a BA for 1 year, or someone who's done a training, some hands-on experience, but essentially unable to land a role. Or perhaps not even getting the clearer picture of how things work. Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges that I find with a lot of people. They know what user stories are, they know how things move in Agile, they sort of know what discovery is, they even understand the Scrum ceremonies and all of that. But on the other hand, it feels like this is 80-90% of what they talk about, and it poses a lot of problems. So the 30 days program essentially is for such people. It's not suitable for everyone. There is obviously an eligibility criteria for that. And that master's program for some people as well can also be done in 4 days. So that's been run every week now, and it runs for 4 days for people who can dedicate the entire 4 days, several hours per day for the 4 days. It can be run within those 4 days and CV and everything sorted. And then job applications would essentially commence after that. But then for typical or regular working people who would need to space out time and stuff, the same program also is delivered across 30 days. Now, there is equally the 6 to 8 week refresher program, for people who may have done some boot camp or some training, but essentially, don't feel very confident, or maybe dropped off before their training was completed, or it's been a very long time and they've sort of lost some of the things they've they learned, or if you consider yourself within that, really you've got some knowledge but you don't feel confident and you don't qualify for the 30 days program, then there's a 6 to 8 week refresher program where you can make a choice to do that either within the NHS case study or perhaps a retail case study. There is equally the 12-week internship, which is designed for people who are absolute new people to business analysis. So, starting from scratch and hoping to get you to a point to which you can sustain some knowledge with which you can essentially begin to make applications. Then we equally have the 4 months bi-directional or bi-domain internship, which will cover both domains, that's the NHS and the retail, projects. And unfortunately, I wouldn't spend too much time because I know that I did promise an hour and I've gone past that time. So I've only got this 2 more slides and, that's it. So in terms of the tools that we offer, would include the Microsoft 365 and the Visio. So that's the full Active Directory account. And it meets the same integrity that you would get in Barclays, in NHS, in Lidl, in any organization. So we've equally approached Microsoft and we've procured the same level of licenses which will be given to you. Now, if you have worked within that corporate environment, you know that the first thing that happens on your first day at work will be that your email will be set out for you, your Active Directory account will be set up for you, your laptop is handed over to you, your Active Directory account essentially providing you with an official email. And with that email and access to that account, you can access all the templates, contact all the stakeholders that are within that environment, have access to SharePoint, as well as professional Visio. So all those are provided, for all the courses ranging beyond 6 weeks to 8 weeks and further. We equally have, and perhaps the only organization to procure a patient administration system. So the projects that you do will not be done on cheap systems or perhaps on, mere descriptions. It will actually be done using a patient administration system, which we have procured. For those of you looking to also work within the retail, we have our own enterprise resource planning software. Okay, and we equally have a postal management software, which essentially works very similarly to maybe DHL. Now, the overall idea is that when products are sold within the multi-vendor application, that's the marketplace, an API call will be made to the ERP. So the ERP then adjusts the inventory, but at the same time, another API call is made to the postal management software, which would then generate a shipping label and make that shipping label available within the retail, within the warehouse. Okay, and then we can walk the process, moving on from there, including using barcode scanners to indicate the location of the item. So it covers the entire supply chain. And, for lack of time, I'm going to go ahead to the very final stages because we are very, very transparent with regards to the pricing, and it's worth, being very upfront with it. So the 30 days master's program, which I've just identified to you, that for those who have the time and who are able to commit 4 days in a row within a week, would essentially be able to cover this within 4 days. The cost is £329. And for the 6 to 8 weeks program, which is an internship program, really, the cost for that will be £550. The payment can be made in installments, as well as that of the 30 days can equally be made in installments. And the 12 weeks internship costs £837, and that can be paid in 3 installments. And we equally have the 4 months bi-directional internship, and that costs £1,000 for both domains. So that's NHS and retail. And, payments for that can be made in 4 installments. And then finally, there is equally the 6 months Zero to Hero program. So this is designed for people seeking to get into the contracting. We don't tend to get many people in that direction, unfortunately so. But we've also had 100% success in the people who have gone in that direction. If we have to actually assess things the way they should rightly be assessed, you cannot ideally master business analysis anywhere within 3 months. So the target usually is to get you sound, over the course of, or perhaps across the flow of business analysis from start to finish. So essentially what I've described to you now, the idea over that 3 months would be to get you very sound in those areas. If you've already done some business analysis training or work experience or stuff, then the idea over the next 30 days, over the next 4 days will be to paint a real life picture, to take that project in a live situation, describing the events, the people, the roles that we interact with, the situations that come up with, as well as helping you to develop stories that will help essentially to, express yourself within interviews. So that will be all. And I do have to apologize for the fact that I have taken much longer than I should have taken. So I will now stand by for any questions. And please feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask any questions. I would like to say thank you once again for being so patient with me. Hi, Oluwatosin. Please go on.
Thanks for the free training. I wanted to ask, does the
Sorry, your voice is very far.
Oh, How about now? Can you hear me?
Yes, it's better
Yeah.
now.
The one for the 4 month, does it cover CV reviews and the rest of them?
Everything, yes.
With the LinkedIn profile, double
With the
check it.
LinkedIn profile, with the CV
Okay.
review. So would actually want to, with your permission,
Okay.
redraft your CV if you currently have one. And there's no other reason why we want to do that other than the fact that we want to use vocabulary which I perceive
Yep.
to be on high demand, upon which you will equally be trained on how to defend. Uh, yeah, so it does include CV revamping or CV, going to tear it down and, rebuild it, and then as well apply that to your LinkedIn profile. It also comes with interview preparation. So when you get your first interview and your second interview, it doesn't matter whether it's a 2 or 3 stage interviews, you'll have that one-to-one with me, and we'll draft first of all, try to conceive the kind of questions that you'll be asked and then prepare you on how best to answer those questions.
All right, because currently I'm writing my BCS International Diploma in Business Analysis. So which is best for me to go for? Is it the 3 month training or the 4 month training? Because
So may
I'm a
I
bit
ask,
confused.
so may I ask what your current situation is, when it comes to business analysis? Have you done some training before? What's the
Yeah, I did some
situation?
training before, but it wasn't really okay. I didn't get what I wanted. Maybe
Okay.
because we are so much and there was so much diversion. So I didn't really
Okay. So,
get the quick
mhm.
knowledge I was looking for.
Okay. So if you have the patience, the 4 months one will be best, will be more suitable to you. The reason being that it covers 2 domains,
Okay.
right? So we start you off with the NHS case study one, which by the way is a live project. We're going to see that system, being retired. You're going to see us move on to the next system. You're going to walk all the way through. And then when you're done with that, you would equally take that transferable skills into the retail side of things, which then makes it a lot easier for you. But then the thing is that the one for the NHS is a commercial off-the-shelf solution, so we've not had to write any user stories or any functional
Yeah.
requirements and stuff. In the next one, in the retail one, you will be doing both a business change, using a commercial off-the-shelf solution, but it will also be enhancing some other legacy systems, which would then mean that you have to write user stories and see how those are implemented. So the 4 month one will give you better coverage, if assuming you do have the time
Okay. And
and
when is the
patience.
training commencing?
So the training commences actually there's only a certain number of people that I take per month, and as of today there's space for I think 3 more for this month,
Okay.
and then there are people graduating every month, so it can really start for whenever you want.
All right. And the repayment plan is it three times or what's the payment plan?
No, so for the 4 month one, you can make the payment plan 4 times across the 4 months.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. Thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Thank you very much. Hi, Victor.
Yeah, hello, Sochi. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes, I can hear you, Victor. How are you doing?
Hello, Sochi. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear
I'm
you,
very well.
if you can
Yourself?
hear me.
Uh,
I'm
yeah,
well.
yeah. Thanks for the lesson. I think it was. I mean, it was. It was beyond what I expected, and I don't know if the recorded class will be sent to us. Is it
Yeah, I
possible?
can do that. If you would like it, just contact me and I will send it to you.
Because
Sorry, I think I lost your focus,
I've done 2
Victor.
years and I worked in the consulting firm. Yeah, so and I like. Yeah, we don't want to go for the 30 days one. So earlier
Victor,
in the week,
I'm
I was at
I'm
work
losing
then,
your
and I
vocals a
tried to
little
call you
bit.
back, but it wasn't. Yeah. Okay, what's going to happen is my network is really bad where I am. So if you call later today, thank you.
Okay, that's fine, Victor. Thank you. I'll be expecting your call. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So what is the timetable for the 4 month? I mean, what days, time, and classes hold? Also, what is the service level agreement? If I buy into the 4 months plan, when is it possible I get a BA job? Okay, thank you very much for that question, my dear friend. So the timetable is actually very flexible. And what I mean by that flexible is that people tend to, people have deliverables. So if you were to start, for example, there are very compulsory times when we will have to provide, one-to-one training, or maybe one to never ever, more than 6 or 7 people per a class. And those would be maybe like providing a training on how to do something and how to map out something and how to do a gap analysis. Beyond that, you get ample time to work on your own. Now, I've got office hours Monday to Friday, so you can pop in anytime, impromptu, as long as it's within those times. If you, however, wanted to, maybe you're doing nights or you're doing unconventional hours and you wanted to have, that meeting at some other time, we can essentially discuss that, and we can schedule a meeting within the diary, and meet to discuss it. So yes, Mondays and Wednesdays will probably be the times when we sort of have our project meetings. Project meeting meaning that we want to know your update, want to discuss what we've done, what we are going ahead with. But beyond that, it's not a group thing. Everybody works on their own. If you're doing well, I will know. Based on your merits, I'll be able to support you. If you get 2 weeks, you can do your job within that 2 weeks and let me know. In terms of giving you a time frame for when you will get a job, my dear friend, it will be very, very criminal for me to make such assertions. You see, however, I could paint a picture that, depending on whether you've given this all, my experience has been that people who sort of, put in quite a lot of effort into the training, tend to be successful within 4 to 7 months after the training has completed. Now, this is me just being on the very safe side. I know people, I've, coached people who essentially are exceptional, who have, been able to land a job even before their training ended. As a matter of fact, there's a guy who just recently got a job last week. His training is due to be completed by the end of this month, but he did start applying before Christmas. So these things differ, and I cannot give you that kind of specific answer. But please feel free to contact me, and I'll be more than happy to share more explanation. Fully practical and no introduction of the LMS brouhaha. Well, there is an LMS, but that's up to you. You're not required to go to it. It's 100% practical, and we provide you the premium tools, so you'll never be asked to go and find Miro or the one that you do, and then it says to extend. We give you the tools. We make it premium. Thank you. Kayode.
Hello, Sochi. Yeah,
Hi,
thank you very
Kayos.
much for the training. Perhaps you must have known that I've already keyed into the business analysis training offered by you, but I
That's right.
just want to know
Mhm.
if 0 to 6 months is going from 0 to hero, then what is the target for 0 to 4 months? In
Awesome.
the sense that if I should be a part of the 4 months business analysis training, yeah,
Mhm.
uh, what is actually the variance between doing the 6 months and the 4 months? Is there any difference, or is there any like different milestone will be achieved at the end of the 6 months? And a different one will be achieved at the end of the 4 months.
Yeah.
Am I making sense? Yeah.
Yes, you made perfect sense. You see, humans get better with things the more they do that thing, right? And the more they do that thing is similar or perhaps is tied to time. So the 4-month program has recorded a lot of success. It will bring a person from, maybe very limited knowledge to a place where they understand the sequential application of activities from start to finish in deploying a commercial off-the-shelf solution. They will equally have an exposure to doing the same within a retail organization, which, would also now include some level of user stories and so on and so forth. The burden might actually be a little bit big, but most average people get on with it and they are successful. Now, the 6-month one is actually it gives you the opportunity to do something over and over and over again. So let's say, for example, you do options appraisal maybe like twice within the 4 months one. That should be significant enough for an average person. But in the 6-month one, you might actually find yourself doing it like 4 to 5 times. And that, the repetitiveness essentially builds an expertise, if you will, in that angle. So that's some of the advantage. And also, whilst you would have spent 6 weeks within the retail side, if you were doing the 4-month one, the 6-month one would essentially give that person, close to 3 months of, understanding around those two. So the way the 6 months in itself is designed, the first 4 months are interchangeable, but then the remaining 6 months can be, either mastering certain aspects of the business analysis, which could include maybe like requirement specification, or perhaps creating documentations that meet ISO 9000 standard, and so on and so forth. So I don't know whether I've been able to articulate it to sufficiently. The 4-month one is sufficient in many cases to help people. I've only had, I think, 3 people who went for that 6 months. The 3 of them was a straight hit for them. And it's really, really common sense at the, if people have that time. But going through that 6 months, there's almost nothing. It's 6 months with a business analyst where you're having weekly one-to-one, or 1 to at most 3 to 4 or 5 people interferences for 6 months. To be honest with you, I lack the words to essentially define them. It's if it were not for the circumstances surrounding it, I would almost give a guarantee in that one. And that's the difference, Coyote, or perhaps that's the similarity.
Okay, thank you very much. So I look forward to making my decision between the 4 and the 6 months, and I'll get back to you.
Not a problem at all, my friend. Awesome. Okay, I think there's someone typing, so I'll give it a minute, and then if there's any more question, please feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself.
I have these children to look after. I have these children as my comfort. Let your wife enjoy staying with you. Let your wife enjoy going with you. Is that okay?
Yes, your wife will enjoy with you. That's very much okay.
I thought I wanted the mic, sorry.
No problems, no worries. That's absolutely fine. Okay, so I will. I mean, you can drop off if you don't have any questions. I think there's one gentleman who's typing a question. But in any case, I would like to thank you so much. There will be another training same time tomorrow, and in which case we're going to be looking at the retail side of things. So yeah, if you do remember a question, if you do have a question or come up maybe later on, you can ask me tomorrow, or we can even catch up on maybe email or WhatsApp. Yeah. and then that would be great. Hi, Babatunde. So I'll just drop my number right now, 07541402945. Yeah, just send me a message on WhatsApp. I'll also drop my email, which is sochi at digitalx.co.uk. Okay, so send me a message or call me, or yeah, just call me or send me a message. Call me on WhatsApp. I think that might be better, but you can also call me on direct line. Either ways will be absolutely fine. Hello, Sochi, what is your contact? I mean, how do I reach out? Are you based at Manchester? Yes, I am based off Manchester. And I've just dropped my number below. Okay, so and my email address as well. So just drop me an email or give me a call, and I'll be more than happy to, provide answers to all your questions. I'm not based in Manchester. That shouldn't be a problem. No, that shouldn't be a problem at all. It's all delivered virtually. Yeah, so the location wouldn't be a problem at all. Okie dokie. Thank you so much, everyone. God bless you. And I will catch up with you guys again tomorrow evening. Do have a very pleasant evening, and God bless.